Friends in Christ, we celebrate this morning the Palm Sunday of the Passion of the Lord. That word passion is found even in many secular dictionaries, defined in a couple of different ways. One of the ways, again, even in secular dictionaries, is the suffering and death of Jesus Christ. So all that we just listened to in St. Luke's Gospel in the Passion narrative, Jesus betrayed by Judas Iscariot, being abandoned by the disciples, denied by St. Peter, his mockery of a trial, his condemnation, and the physical scourging, the suffering, the cross, and ultimately his death and burial, all fit that description of the passion of Christ in his suffering and in his death. But the second definition that's more commonly used in the culture we live in means an eager desire for something or for someone. If you're passionate about a person or something. And we find both of those descriptions for Christ in the Gospel of St. Luke this weekend. Obviously, his suffering and death is the center of the passion narrative. Yet at the beginning of that passion narrative, Jesus says to the disciples at the Last Supper, "I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer." Another translation could be, "I am passionate about eating this Passover meal with you before I undergo my passion." And what it tells us clearly is that over and above the suffering that Jesus receives in a passive sense, what happens to him during the passion, over and above that, he asserts his own will, his own desire to offer his life for the salvation of the world and to offer his body and blood for the renewal of the human race. And so it's been said before that it's not suffering that redeems the world. It's love in suffering that saves us. And so it is that Christ offers himself in love on the altar of the cross, his body and his blood broken and poured out. But even so, on the night before he dies, he earnestly desires, in a passionate way, to give his body and blood to the disciples and to the church. And long after the resurrection, all throughout the early church, during the martyrdoms, during persecutions and tribulations of 1,000 different kinds, and down through the centuries, even to our own current age today, Christ has earnestly desired to pour himself out in his body and blood in the blessed sacrament of the Eucharist, to accompany the church in her suffering, to make himself present in a world that desperately needs him and that needs salvation. In the world that we live in today with so much suffering, with the war in Ukraine, the war that's happening in Syria or in Yemen, and all the suffering throughout the world, the suffering that we're experiencing in the human family, and our individual sufferings, the crosses that we bear, we're reminded on Palm Sunday of the Passion of the Lord that God eagerly desires to come into our lives and to change them, to transform them, and to give us new life and new hope. How are we called to respond to that invitation, especially by gathering together with the church this Passion Sunday and throughout this Holy Week? How can we rediscover in our own lives a passion for his passion, knowing that Christ eagerly desires to enter deeply into our lives and to transform them?